the knowledge of Pokémon, the everlasting need to have these funky little dudes in our lives, the unfathomable joy it brings to millions of people every day, the undying and unconquerable rage that manifests when a Pokémon goes bipedal. These are the emotions I wish to bring forth today. Now, keep in mind that I am no Pokémon artist and actually really rarely draw animals, so this was a fun challenge for me. With a day of Violet and Scarlet releasing drawing ever nearer, I've recently gotten addicted to Pokémon again. Yay. Now, Pokémon is a game that has always meant a lot to me, especially growing up. So, when I started watching others draw fakemon recently, I got extremely inspired. Almost out of nowhere. I wanted to be a part of this, and I wanted to draw a fakemon of my own. So, I drew my own starters. I wanted to base these off of animals that can be found in similar regions of each other, before settling on the 3 that I thought would mesh well together. So, without further ado, let's get into it. The first Pokemon starter that I settled on was what I looked up to be a pine marten, which is actually an animal that finds itself climbing trees a lot and can be found in Europe. It is also closely related to otters and other creatures. So I thought, what better for a starter Pokemon? This was going to be the grass type. Originally, when I started this Pokemon, I was trying to start with the beginning stage of the Pokemon, but I didn't quite like how the proportions were, so I quickly polished that up and made the Pokemon longer in general. I gave it sharp, large claws to point to the idea of the martens climbing trees a lot. I wanted this to be a theme that followed throughout the evolutionary line. I wanted its tail to resemble a branch without straight up being one, so I made it more jagged and tried to keep a bipedal form to this Pokemon. Since the other 2 in this series end up not being bipedal, I thought it would be a nice counter to those 2. I originally tried to keep the color palette more browns and yellows, but decided that the green matched more with its typing. But I had a bit of trouble making the colors desirable to look at first. However, in the end I'm happy with how this came out, and could almost be a furry with this. I ended up realizing that this Pokemon wasn't simple enough for a first stage Pokemon, so I scooched it upwards to the second evolution instead. Brasslash, the Backlash Pokemon. Brasslash have evolved to be bipedal compared to their pre-evolution, which helps them spot prey better and makes it easier to scale trees with their longer proportions. Their claws have gotten sturdier and longer, their tails representing the branches they climb so that they can blend in with the environment around them. However, they have gained more yellow to their palette to warn predators of their possible danger. Compared to their pre-evolution, this Pokemon is a bit more reserved. Keeping their curious nature, they tend to watch others from a distance, deciding whether or not they pose a threat before approaching. If these Pokemon are betrayed, they will find a way to bring that betrayal back to the ones who harmed them. They will make sure that the pain is 2 times the amount they felt, and will not rest until they do so. This Pokemon is a grass type. After this Pokemon, I jumped straight into the first evolution. This one was a challenge for me since more cute-looking creatures usually aren't in my drawings, but I ended up getting something I was happy with. The colors, I originally took straight from the evolution, before changing them up a tiny bit and just trying to keep it more simple looking than the second evolution. That's definitely something I respect Pokemon designers for. Once it was done, I was happy with how cute and non-furry bait it looked, while still being somewhat simple without going overboard. The tiny tail is adorable, and I'm just glad I was able to bring it together in the end. Pickin, the tree climbing Pokemon. These Pokemon have razor-sharp claws that are able to scale any tree in a matter of seconds. They use these claws to help hunt down small rodent Pokemon and bug types. Although mainly carnivorous, these Pokemon will also settle for berries of all different types. Their coat has evolved to match the bark of trees, whilst looking like little bunches of leaves whilst they sleep. Their tails look like a tree branch to keep this factor in line, a trait that they gained that helps them survive larger predators that may look to snack upon them. This Pokemon is sweet yet mischievous. Although they look cute and cuddly, they are extremely dangerous at their end. However, this Pokemon is naive and has almost no fear towards humans or trainers. It will often approach them and attempt to get food. This Pokemon is a grass type. With the final evolution, I snagged a pose I liked right from the get-go. It was dynamic and almost exactly what I was hoping for. Almost. The arms themselves took a lot of time to figure out because despite me liking the outstretched pose of the palms, I felt like that really covered up too much of the design in general. So I played around with it until I eventually came to a pose that I found acceptable. With this Pokemon, I was really trying to up it from its last evolution while still making it seem Pokemon. I wanted the color scheme to be different, so I went a little lighter, before pretty much bringing the other colors back in. It ended up looking as if its fur was camouflaged, which I actually really like as a concept, especially for the fact that I had not even considered it. Clothel, the lethal Pokemon. This Pokemon has evolved to be not just mischievous, but almost cruel in a type of way. It will not open up to strangers unless given a specific reason to. It is extremely protective of its first stage evolution, knowing that its naive nature will be the death of it. These Pokemon tend to spend their days in the trees, lurking and watching for prey to walk into view. It then captures this prey and uses its claws to keep them in place. This Pokemon preys on bigger Pokemon since it needs more nutrients than Stickin does. This Pokemon will not attack unless attacked first, usually, unless hunting, but will make sure to put the creature or trainer that threatened it into an unbelievable amount of pain. It wants to make sure that the point is taken. It stands on two legs to intimidate those that might think of attacking them, and their fur is perfect for camouflage. Despite all these facts, if raised correctly or treated correctly, these Pokemon are extremely loyal and caring towards those it considers allies. This Pokemon is a grass fighting type. Alright, on to the next one. For this Pokemon, I wanted to do a lizard based off of this one that I found that resides within Europe. It is called the Green European Lizard. Just look at him. Anyway, as much as I loved that color palette, I needed to make sure that it still looked fire type. So I changed its color to a more orangish, or oh. That's just Charmander, isn't it? I really enjoyed the accented blue atop the orange, causing a really almost painful pop. I love how the flames on its tail slowly dissipate as they go up his back, and just look at him. He's a little lad. Leezem, the sunbathing Pokemon. These Pokemon spend most of their days laying out on the rocks and sunbathing. The sun's rays soak into their skin and they store them in the blue areas of their neck and their tails as well. These Pokemon tend to be laid back and easygoing, however, they're always down for an adventure. This Pokemon is a fire type. For the second evolution, I wanted it to be a little more intimidating than the first one. Originally, I was gonna have the tail wrapping around the Pokemon, but quickly scrapped that because it covered most of the design once more. Instead, I went for a more menacing pose that had the little undercolor of blue slowly turning into a beard of fire. I made the shapes a little more sharp and jagged, whilst bringing the colors down in saturation. While coloring it, I originally made these little patterns and planned on using effects to make them look more fire-like. they didn't really end up working the way I wanted, so I took them out at the end. All in all, I think this is my favorite stage of this Pokemon. Scorsatile, the versatile lizard Pokemon. These Pokemon are a lot more energetic compared to their pre-evolution. Considering that most of their juvenile days were spent sunbathing, these Pokemon have stored up plenty of the sun's rays, which allows fire to begin to emerge underneath its neck, giving it a beard-like appearance. Since they have more energy stored up, these Pokemon spend a lot of their time training and sparring with others of its kind, attempting to get stronger while still protecting the younger of the group. They hold strong bonds with others that they grew up with, and can be rather slow to adapt to newcomers. However, this Pokemon is able to change and adapt to its environment. This Pokemon is a fire type. For the final evolution, I had a hard time upstaging the second evolution. I wanted it to look more powerful and more regal in a way. I struggled with the pose for a while, not knowing exactly what I wanted to do, and I didn't want it to be too stiff. I even tried lengthening the body at one point to make it seem more reptilian, but absolutely hated the way it turned out and immediately backtracked. Eventually, I settled and began to finalize the design. The Firebeard looking like it was see-through while still being the same idea as the second idea, just bringing it throughout the body. This is a Pokemon that I think has potential, but I would like to redo and refine at some point in the future. Drierdawn, the bearded dragon Pokemon. This Pokemon has grown to be a lot more stoic than its pre-evolutions. It carries a high level of responsibility on its shoulders and knows it. It doesn't have time to play around and spends most of its days protecting those it holds dear, whilst still staying in command. These Pokemon oftentimes do the hunting for the group and understand the burden that they hold by being in charge. Their fire is a lot more controlled and covers the neck in a thick layer that makes it hard for foes to get through. This Pokemon is a fire dragon type. The final idea. Well, actually this evolutionary line was the first one I drew overall, but I ended up liking it the most, so I saved it for last. When I was looking through ideas for animals to use, I found this image of a moose covered in what seems to be vegetation of some sort. I immediately fell in love with it and knew I had to do some kind of moose Pokemon. I had a little bit of trouble deciding if I wanted this line to be grass or the water type, since it had elements of both. I finally decided that it would be a water type since moose are aquatic hunters, and moss, which I had already decided to have growing from the moose, comes from water, so it just seemed to fit overall. The first evolution, I wanted it to look as cute as possible, so I went for a baby moose. I mean, he looks like he's a little confused about life, but he's trying his best. I didn't want to oversell the idea of moss in this first stage, but I had to incorporate moss in some way, so I brought the moss in without trying to be too overboard about it. Mossy, the moss Pokemon. This Pokemon has evolved to grow a convincing moss-like blanket around itself. It helps this Pokemon blend in to hide from predators and keep them warm whilst they're diving. These Pokemon do not yet have the lung capacity to dive to great depths like their evolutions have done, but on occasion they will go down and practice their breathing to get better lung capacity overall. They get most of their food from others in their group, but are much quicker and have better eyesight overall. This helps them spot predators that may be nearby and alert others in their group that may not be able to see as well. This Pokemon is a water type. The second evolution I wanted to be emo. I know that's a stereotype among middle stage starters, but I find it such a funny trope. And the idea of the moss just going into its eyes and it just being done with life was just amazing to me. So I went with it. Originally, I had to pose more upwards before quickly realizing that that was not how I wanted to go. So I made the Pokemon more stooping whilst seeming somewhat charismatic. I brought the moss down its body more and added the beginning of antlers to help bring it into the next evolution. Its colors are a lot darker and are still trying to be water type without going too grass type. It might end up being a dual type, but I am not entirely sure how well that would work. Emotion, the emotional Pokemon. This Pokemon has grown its moss out of a lot more than its pre-evolved form due to the emotions that run through this Pokemon. Despite it being monotone all the time, it actually gets upset very easily and has trouble coping. This caused this Pokemon to create a toxin that releases and causes moss to grow at a faster rate. Moss both helps this Pokemon hide from others and also keep cool during the heat. Since it's usually wet, it weighs this Pokemon down a bit and obscures its eyesight slightly. However, it makes up for it in the padding that the moss adds for protection. This Pokemon is a water type. For the final evolution, I got the pose I wanted almost right away. I wanted this thing to be covered in moss. It almost looks like a bison, but I added my idea of the antlers just being overloaded with moss as well, and this thing is pretty much a moss monster. I love him so much. Just a blob of moss. I wanted the color palette to be much darker than the other two and to look like both moss yet watery at the same time. This has to be my favorite final evolution I've done. To be fair, this is my favorite evolutionary line I did in general, which to be fair isn't fair, but like, look at them. They're amazing. Mossulant, the diving Pokemon. This Pokemon has evolved to have extremely superior lung capacity compared to other Pokemon. They can hold their breath for hours whilst diving underneath the water to get food for members of its group. The moss that envelops its body helps it stay underwater better as well, helping weigh it down so the added oxygen in their lungs doesn't cause them to float upwards. The moss, while having a toxic chemical to most, is extremely nutritious for the young mossy that may need to feed upon it. Luckily, Mossulant's moss coating grows back extremely fast and causes their defenses to be much higher than usual. However, their obstructed view makes it extremely difficult to see, making it hard to hit their opponents on occasion. And there we have it. These were extremely fun to make, and I'm so glad that I ended up making them. I want to do more challenges like these, whether they be Pokemon challenges or just drawing challenges in general in the future. So, I hope you all enjoyed, and I will hopefully see you in the next video.